It was a big week for Xbox. Next week will be a big week for Windows. And the week after that will be a big week for Microsoft. And that's a lot of big weeks if you think about it. On Sunday, there was the Xbox thing. There's a big Windows release next week. And at the end of the month, well, it's the end of the fiscal year for Microsoft. And that sort of wraps it up. And then we'll see a big, usually a typical change starting in the new year. And sometimes there's reorgs and other things happening. So let's just kind of dive into the news. Hopefully you had a wonderful week, my friends. Let's kick it off here. So next week, the big Windows on ARM release is finally happening, if I could enunciate. The big Snapdragon Elite X, I almost called it the Series X, like the Xbox, but the big X Elite chips are going to be available. Those devices are, I think, now in the post, and they're shipping to customers and everything else. And so that arrives next week. The Surface devices ship on the air, I should say, arrive on the 18th. And so this has sort of been, a kickoff point here for ARM on Windows. Yeah, you could say maybe that was actually in 2012, but I think we can all agree, finally it feels like it's right there. Like this might be the time. Maybe this is it. And so we will see. So next week is going to be monumental because we're going to get benchmarks. We're going to get multiple devices hitting the market. We're going to have tons of options to go out and try this stuff and not just limited to a small handful of collection of basically service devices or kind of just things you may not have wanted to buy up until now. Now, not to downplay that, but I think the bigger news might be what happens in 2025 with ARM. So now Reuters, who has been leaking a lot of information about ARM and the Microsoft plan, says that MediaTek will also release ARM-based chips for Microsoft's AI laptops in 2025. Now we've previously heard, again from Reuters, that Nvidia and AMD also have plans to do this. So that means that next year, it looks like the the exclusivity agreement with Qualcomm ends this year. And so they're obviously trying to get a land grab, but next year there's going to be more players coming to market. And that's a big deal. And the Nvidia one is the one that interests me the most. Not that the others can't. I mean, Texas Instrument, if they were in there, then it'd be just like 2012 all over again. But Nvidia, they also make this little thing called the GPU as well, right? They make these RTX, these high-end GPUs. And so you can imagine them bundling or creating a system on a chip that has a 2070 is maybe a little old, like a 3060 or a 4060 or something like that. You see what I mean? They could do some really interesting stuff on the GPU side that Qualcomm, I mean, yes, they make their own GPUs as well, but it's not the same league as what Nvidia does. So that will be super interesting. Also, speaking of ARM, there's this little problem for Qualcomm. They are in a legal battle or dispute with ARM. So ARM creates the licensing for all the chips, and Qualcomm has a license, and Qualcomm acquired a company, I think in 2022, and some of that technology that was acquired in 2022 is being used in these AI PCs, and ARM is saying, hey, you needed a new license for that, and Qualcomm saying, no, bro, we don't. Our license is already covering the stuff that we acquired, and so they're in a legal battle, which the big headlines that have been making the rounds are that, hey, ARM is asking for all these devices to be destroyed or pulled from shelves, right as Microsoft is about to ship them out the door, which isn't making anybody too happy. I seriously doubt they are going to get pulled from the shelves. This will be something that is solved, most likely out of court and just quietly, and things will get resolved. But both these companies are posturing themselves, and so money's on the line, and you know how that all goes. Another not great headline for Microsoft at the end of the day is this one from WWDC, which was Apple's developer event. So apparently Apple isn't really paying to use ChatGPT. Now, if you remember, Microsoft invested $10 billion into ChatGPT, and to date, there is a native ChatGPT app for Mac OS, and then there's this huge deal where Apple is going to be integrating some of ChatGPT's technology or functionality, I should say, into Siri/iOS 18, and there's no money exchanging hands. There's no money, according to Bloomberg, who is saying that Apple is basically look, we're paying through distribution, right? And what that means is exposure. So it's like those old things. It's come work for us for free. The exposure that you get, that will cover and make you more money later. And that's effectively what Apple's saying. So they're not making any money from this, which I would have to think makes Microsoft not feel great. It's just Apple's just kind of, oh yeah, we'll just use your stuff. That's cool. We're not going to pay you for it. And maybe you'll get some signups or whatever, and that'll cover the cost. So there you go. We're not going to pay you for it. And it's geez, that's kind of a big thing. Now, like peeling it back a little bit, what Microsoft really wanted with that $10 billion into OpenAI is primarily that they build it all on Azure. That is what they want. They want their cloud to be like, hey, we're the cloud that powers AI. So come use us. If it's good enough for ChatGPT/OpenAI, it's good enough for you. And so that's, I think, more what it wants, but it's like still just not a great headline for Microsoft at the end of the day. Other headlines that are making the rounds, Microsoft releases .NET MAUI extension for VS Code. Microsoft Loop add comments for tables and boards and a new print to PDF commands. Those are all good things for Microsoft Loop. And then one of the more, let's try to figure out just like what's going on here. So Skype teased like, hey, we've got a big announcement coming. Now, if you remember several years ago, there was a massive overhaul of the UI where Skype tried to be more like Snapchat, I guess, and this might have been like 2018. I can't exactly remember the timeline, but their big announcement was that Skype was going to use reality lenses powered by Snap. And like, these are just, yeah, so you now have filters and Skype, and if that excites you, super happy for you at the end of the day. I don't know. Skype is Skype. I don't really know what's happening to Skype anymore. And then the other thing that has come out this week is that Microsoft is going to be tying its top executives, like 1/3 of their individual portion of their bonuses in the new fiscal year will be tied to their contributions to their cybersecurity work, according to the company's president, Brad Smith, as he told the U.S. House Committee ahead of a hearing on Thursday, which, as you may remember, hey, they're trying to bolster that security posture because they've had some high-profile incidents, and so now they're putting dollars behind it, at least 1/3 of dollars for individual performance. I don't know what that actually shakes out to because I don't know how many different categories there are, but at least the individual performance is going to be tied to this security-related work. So there you go. There you go. That is the tech news. On to the gaming news this week. Now, I'm not going to do like a super deep dive into this event that happened because this happened on Sunday. It's depending on when you're listening to this, might be a week ago. However, I do just want to point out just a couple quick things that I think Xbox nailed it. I think this was probably their best in an extremely long time, maybe going back to the Xbox 360 days, primarily because I think they did a good job of like grabbing on to nostalgia and just making people want to play the games that they used to play. And now I don't mean just like showing off Age of Empires 2, which is still a great game and I still play. But I mean, like, look, they showed off Indiana Jones, which is a big brand title. Like, my mom knows what Indiana Jones is. And then for like the Xbox loyal, there was like Perfect Dark, there's Fable, there's Flight Sim, there's Doom and Call of Duty. And I recognize that all that is like true Xbox only games, but right, if you're a gamer, you know what Doom is, you know what Perfect Dark was, you know Fable and Flight Sim. And so like they really hit on these big branded titles and they had a good cadence to it. They didn't try to interrupt it with other noise and other non-related announcements and like, please sign up for Game Pass every 30 seconds. They really just let the games sell themselves, which was beautiful. And I think Xbox is really learning. It's like people just want the games. That's all they want. They don't need these deep diving interviews. They don't need that. They don't like save all that for later, which is honestly what they did. They posted up a bunch of videos of these interviews with the developers, which was great. I'm glad they did not sprinkle that all in. Show us the games. I think they did a pretty darn good job with it. Now, the other thing that they announced, like a more immediate announcement, here are these new Xbox consoles. And new is in quotation. So there's a new Xbox Series S in Robot White that comes with 1 terabyte of storage, $349 dues. That's the entry level. The carbon black one is DOA, or no, not DOA. It's just dead. Like, they're not making it anymore. It's now back to Robot White. That's not the big whatevers. On the Xbox Series X side, there's effectively 2 new consoles, right? There is the new Top Dog. The new Top Dog is $599 dues. And that is the only way you can get a disc drive anymore. So if you're like, I want an Xbox with a disc drive, head out to Best Buy right now and find one, a classic Series X, if you will, that's 1 terabyte of storage. That's like it should be $499 with a disc drive unless you find one on sale. So $599 if you want a disc drive going forward. However, there is the all digital version Xbox Series X for $449. So the TLDR here of all of this is that physical media is dead. Xbox is doing its best to kill it, and this will probably be, in my opinion, the last generation that there maybe is physical media in what we know today. So just kind of keep that in mind. Also, after the event, or I should say after the event, they did it with Phil Spencer did an interview with IGN, effectively confirming that he wants to make a handheld and that a handheld is going to happen. So yeah, I think if Phil Spencer wants it, he's leading Xbox. I guess he's got to get budgetary potential approval for something like this. I don't know what his, how much money he can spend without going to the board or something like that, but that is there. And then there's also the Xbox June update is now rolling out. And so there's a bunch of new features coming to your console in the very near future, including you can have dynamic backgrounds, also show game art on the dashboard. We're going to see more, or actually more. Everybody can now get access to keyboard and mouse support for all cloud gaming products. The Elite Series 2 is getting a connection update, which is really good because I experienced this with Dropout. That has now been fixed. And what will likely be a core feature that helps out the Xbox handheld, your non-mobile Xbox console can now remember up to 10 wireless networks. So, kind of do with that information with what you will. 10 networks for a device that never really moves. I guess some people probably take them to like maybe their friend's house or a college dorm or something like that, but 10's a lot. Although, what's the difference from a development perspective, I guess? What's the difference between like 3 and 10? Probably not. 10's probably just an arbitrary number that they just kind of pulled out and said, that kind of just feels right. So, on to the questions of the week, my favorite part. First question dropping in the box is from Will. He says, do you think the future next-gen Xbox console as well as handheld is ARM or x86? This is a question that doesn't quite keep me up at night, but it's a good little riddle because an ARM... So I've postured it many times actually on this podcast. Like, what could Xbox do in the handheld space that would differentiate it from like the Legion Go or the ROG Ally, like those devices that literally already exist? An ARM chip could be something that quite literally differentiates it from an x86 competitor. If it can get better battery life, if performance is there. That is one thing that would kind of like lean it towards like, okay, maybe that makes sense for Xbox. The other thing too is, what if they did do an ARM in the whole console, right? One thing I do think is that whatever side they go, I think that will be the same. So meaning if the new console that sits under your TV is ARM, then a handheld ARM would probably happen. If the thing that sits under your TV is x86, if they do a handheld, I would expect it to be x86 then as well. As for my personal opinion, which route do I think they will go? Man, this one's tough because first off, there's some, you can do some like logical reasoning here. First off, their partner is almost always AMD for this sort of thing. I think it's always been, hasn't it always been AMD? It's last couple generations for sure has been AMD. Well, what's AMD do? AMD does x86. However, as I noted previously in the podcast, they are building an ARM chip. So yeah, but then the back of my brain is like, do you really want to bet on an ARM chip for a company building effectively their first ARM chips, all these mass commercial product for like that style of thing on a console and risk your Xbox brand? I don't know. I bet they go x86 is my bet. But then again, there were the rumors that said they were going to experiment with ARM. I don't have like an absolute, it has to be this way. The thing that would hold back ARM, which we don't quite know about again, is going to be the emulation of these legacy titles. Remember, Microsoft's doing a lot of work, or Xbox is doing a lot of work. I think Sarah Bond announced they have a team dedicated towards it, which if they're moving from x86 to ARM, they're going to have a lot of work ahead of them. So it's like the risk and reward, because the ARM narrative makes a lot more sense if there's some dynamic performance gain, especially in the desktop console. Not so much the handheld, I'm more focused on the desktop, the traditional console, if you will. And so if there is a true performance gain there, then maybe, can a desktop or a box that sits under your TV reliably hit 4K, 60 frames per second on any mode? Then maybe. Rafik says, hi Brad, what is Nvidia exactly doing with AI to the point where their revenue doubled and they have become almost the most valuable company in the world? So in a world of where everyone's trying to find gold, which is AI, Nvidia sells shovels, and those shovels are GPUs that are really, really good at doing the calculations, if you will, or that power these large language models or large learning models, however you want to look at it. And Nvidia has the best of the breed. And they also have the capacity to produce the numbers that are needed for the industry. And they are so high in demand that effectively they take one of these things and they don't say, hey, this thing isn't $99. They go to the market and say, what are you going to pay me for this? Like, if you want 1,000 of them right now, what are you paying me? And so the market is just like bidding these things up. Now, the problem Nvidia will have is like they're a hardware manufacturer, right? They need to eventually, like, there will be a saturation point, and don't think that other companies aren't chasing them down, like AMD. Even Microsoft is trying to build their own stuff. And so at some point they will have an issue where their competitors are closing the gap, but that's just not here right now. And right now, Nvidia can supply the number of GPUs that are needed for the data centers that can do all the heavy lifting at a scale, and they can charge whatever they want for them. And that's really that's really about as simple as you can make it. Jay Fakara says, hi, Brad. As always, thank you for the great content and insightful perspective. Thank you for listening. I love this part of the podcast. Sans the PC component of Game Pass. Do you think that Xbox Play for why Xbox consoles is about Game Pass? That seems to be the differentiator between a game available on another console and the Xbox console. So I don't think you're too far from the mark here. What he's saying is, we'll use Doom, the Dark Ages that was just announced as an example. It is going to PlayStation. It is also going to be in Game Pass. So his question is that the argument for why you would want to buy an Xbox console? Because you cannot get Game Pass on PlayStation, and let's be honest, I don't think you're going to be able to get it any reasonable time in the future, right? It's going to be an Xbox console exclusive Game Pass for the time being, and I think that is part of it. As an example myself, I pay for Game Pass. That makes a lot of sense because I like Call of Duty, which is now included, and then I play Age of Empires 2. I dabble in Flight Sim, and so for me to go over to PlayStation, not only would I have to rebuy the content, but you got to rebuild the catalog as well, the back cat, because right, I can still go back in time and play older games. And so there's a stickiness to that. And so for somebody new coming into the market, it's really, really advantageous to look at Game Pass because it's like, okay, I can pay, we'll just say roughly like $17 a month, but I get access to all these games. And it's not just all these games, like it's literally Call of Duty, which we already know moves consoles. That is a staple of the console experience is Call of Duty. Even if you don't play it, it has a huge following. So I don't think you're too far off from what Xbox is trying to provide as the value for the console going forward, rather than there are going to be some exclusives, right? That is a given, but they also need to make money. And so we're going to see more on PlayStation. Phil Spencer has already acknowledged we're going to see more on PlayStation, such as Doom. And I think there's rumored that there might be a Halo title, an older Halo title eventually showing up on PlayStation. Microsoft is becoming a game publisher first, and then a console seller second. And if someone's going to twist that and say, wow, they're giving up on consoles is no longer, it's literally always been the case. Making consoles in quotations is easy compared to making a content catalog machine that Microsoft has now built. So I will die on that hill that it's easier to build a console than it is to build a content pipeline that is dropping big budget titles 2 to 3 times a year. Every year is very, very difficult. Confused Geek says, what does Confused Geek say here? Like you, I don't care where I can play Xbox games. And to his point, what I've said previously is I don't care what's on PlayStation. I care what I can get on my Xbox because that is what I play. I want them to succeed. I wonder if first-party games get delayed on PS for 6 months or longer. There are a lot of tactics that Xbox can take to make this make more sense and potentially shift more consoles. This is a perfect one. Let's use Doom. What if Doom shows up on Xbox 6 months prior to PlayStation? That is a narrative. You get to play it early. It doesn't really, whatever it is, whatever the title is, I should say, shows up on Xbox, then eventually goes to PlayStation. I bet we see Xbox do this. I know Starfield has been rumored, then not rumored to go to PlayStation. It still wouldn't surprise me, like if some point many years down the road it does show up, because Microsoft can just go drop that in there, make some money, and then move on. The one thing I do not have any insight into is if you have an Xbox exclusive game, how hard is it to port it over to PlayStation? I candidly do not know how difficult that process would be. If it's never going to be like, oh, just click a button and it's done. But like, let's say it's 3 months worth of work for 10 engineers. Well, can you justify that cost by shipping it on there? You might be able to, and 10 engineers might be a lot. I don't exactly know how difficult that is. It's a question I would love to know the answer to. Confused Geek also says, does Xbox risk getting the current Windows market? Oh, okay. So there's a current crop of Windows handheld devices. Are they going to make everybody angry if they go ship them? Well, there's precedence to say that Microsoft doesn't really care. Look at Surface. There used to be a whole bunch of laptops. Surface enters the market. And then here you go. It doesn't really matter. I don't think they're too worried about that. I don't have any sales data on how well these things are selling, but it doesn't seem like they're flying off the shelves like a Steam Deck or a Nintendo Switch. Like, I don't get that impression. I'm not saying they're not selling modestly, but I just don't know how well they are selling at the end of the day for these companies. Like, Lenovo's not paying their mortgage or they're making payroll off of these handhelds. They still have bread and butter that is happening behind the scenes. So, and wrapping up the questions for the week is Mr. PKI. It says, what do you think about the backlash about Windows Copilot recall feature? Is everyone reassured of the privacy and risk that announced the changes? So here's the gut take on this. One, if Microsoft wanted to spy on everything you were doing, they already had that ability. I'm not saying they do, but you use their browser, you use Microsoft 365, you use Windows, they already had this ability. And so put the tinfoil hat on. Recall obviously amps that up. And so Microsoft certainly made some mistakes here. What I don't understand is Microsoft's reaction to this was really bad. Even if this was a total lie, I don't know the answer to this. They could have just said, hey, look, that early build that everybody got their hands on, that was a debugging build and everything's going to be encrypted by the time it ships to everybody. That would have solved. I don't know why they didn't say that answer, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to, maybe that wasn't the truth. I don't know. But anyways, back to the question at hand. So they're making a lot of changes. It's fine. I haven't used Recall yet, so I don't know specifically how good it is. The thing that I'm floating around here is, so originally when it was announced, it was going to be on by default. The kiss of death on a lot of things, not just Windows, is when it's off by default. And so by Recall going to off by default, it's going to dramatically lower the usage of it. Even on these new PCs, I'm sure there'll be some things like turn on Recall, see how cool it is. I'm no doubt that's going to happen. But by being off by default, I mean, think about how often the average user changes a default experience. Not very much. Not very much. I strongly suspect that in the future, Recall will probably be turned on by default again. Maybe once they kind of get over this wave of we kind of screwed up. We didn't do a good job enunciating how this is going to work, how your data is protected. And so we will see. And it also requires Windows Hello. So Microsoft did the right thing to kind of lock it down. However, we need to see these changes out there to make sure that they didn't break the experience, make sure that they actually did encrypt all the data. That was the big thing, is that the data was not encrypted. And again, their explanation of we're going to take a screenshot of your laptop every 5 to 6 seconds, and then that's searchable and we will never use it. I still have big questions around corporate use. An enterprise customer having this data and then they get in a lawsuit, e-discovery, this thing is how does that play into it? I suspect every corporation on the planet is turning this thing off. Even if it's the most useful thing on the planet, just the privacy from a lawsuit perspective is huge. And then that raises the other questions Microsoft just told us all this stuff was encrypted. And then all of a sudden it's exposed in a lawsuit and here you are right again. I don't know. I will wait to wager any final verdict until I see it and use it to understand the usefulness of it. Time will be the true arbiter here of whether or not this thing sticks around. So I feel like I did a sufficient job dodging that and not really answering it. I guess, I don't know, to literally answer the question. I think the backlash was justified. I do, right? This is a very invasive feature if used and put into the wrong hands. And so it's good to see Microsoft made changes. In traditional Microsoft fashion, they did a poor job of explaining it and they did a worse job of justifying it. However, typically at the end of the day, they land in the right place, which feels, at least on paper, where they did. So there you go, guys. There you go. That wraps it up for this week. Hopefully you had a wonderful week. I really did. And look forward to next week. As always, make sure to keep it subscribed to this podcast because the only BS here is me.